Let's talk about the debate on gun violence. I started my day in Newtown, Connecticut. When I'm home, there's probably not a weekend that goes by where I don't spend some portion of my weekend there. I represented Newtown in the House of Representatives before I was elected to the Senate. This morning there was a group of 26 bike riders who were riding symbolically, 26 of them, from Newtown to Washington, D.C. In memory of the children and adults who were killed to try to advocate for gun violence laws in Washington, D.C. I wear two bracelets here. One is for a soldier who was killed in Afghanistan to remind me of that obligation. The other one is for a young boy who was killed in Newtown. And clearly, this horrific incident has awoken this nation to a much broader problem, which is the just absolutely unconscionable number of people who are killed by guns in this nation on a daily basis. Newtown was the clarion call, but since Newtown, 2,400 people have been killed through gun violence, and we need to do something. I know there'll be people here who disagree, but let me just talk to you about what we are considering right now. Right now, we're considering, when it comes to gun laws, background checks for all gun purchases. You know, it's hard to exactly tell how many gun purchases don't go through background checks today, but you know, it could be as many as 4 out of 10 gun purchases don't go through a background check legally because they're sold in a private sale or at a gun show. And you know, again, I think that studies show that 90% of Americans agree, and most gun owners agree, that everybody that sells a gun, everybody that buys a gun, should have to prove that they're not a criminal. Second, clearly the most controversial piece of this is banning military-style assault weapons. I support that provision, albeit while admitting that the definitions here are easy when it comes to defining what weapons are in that ban and outside that ban. But I think it's important to recognize that there are weapons that can do a lot of damage that probably should be in the hands of the military rather than in the hands of civilians. Maybe most important to me is the third one, which is this issue of banning high-capacity magazines. In Tucson and in Aurora and in Connecticut, the shooters had magazines or cartridges that were 30 rounds or more. And that is where I think a lot of the damage is done, is when these amateur shooters, most of them are young men who haven't done much of this in the past, are coming in with very high-capacity magazines. And a lot of us believe, and a lot of the parents in Newtown believe, that if they were not available to that particular young man, there would perhaps be more kids alive today. It tends to be that when the assailant fumbles the exchange of reloading, that provides an opportunity for the shooting to stop. And then lastly here is, we just need to take a lesson from this incident. Whether or not Adam Lanza could have been treated better in the mental health system, we just have a totally inadequate mental health system when it comes to treating especially at-risk young adults and teenagers. And I don't think we want to set up too high expectations that we're going to sort of be able to pick potential mass murderers out ahead of time and before that happens. But there are just millions of kids and young adults that are being very badly served by our mental health system today. And we should have way more resources available to families who do want to reach out and get help for their loved one, or in schools where they can perhaps identify that small subset of individuals where mental illness overlaps with predilection to violence. And of course, that's the caution here, is that you don't want to make people believe that everybody who's mentally ill is prone to violence. In fact, the opposite is really true. People that are mentally ill are much more likely to be the victims of violence rather than the perpetrators of violence. And so we've got to have a better mental health delivery system, but we got to do it in a way that doesn't further stigmatize an illness that is far too often stigmatized. And then I'll add one last thing here. While I think it's dangerous to sort of suggest that school safety improvements could have changed the outcome in Sandy Hook, I do think we need to give schools more resources when it comes to safety. So I think under the right circumstances, school resource officers can be of assistance to especially high schools and middle schools. And I think there are certainly a lot of technological improvements that you can make to schools to make them safer, make them harder to get into for people that want to do some pretty awful mischief inside. So schools, we're going to be having a hearing in the next week or so in one of the committees that I'm on school safety. And while I don't want to sell that as the answer, because I don't want our schools to become prisons, I do think that that's an important piece of the debate as well. Okay, so that's a sort of introduction to the three topics that are probably being talked about most. But there are a million other things that we can talk about here today. We have obviously had an epic filibuster last week by Rand Paul on the issue of the use of drones. We should probably, hopefully there'll be a question so we can talk